There it is. Okay. So, talk to me a little bit about what you are nerding out on.
So I'm a Marvel fan, and I am looking forward to the next Captain America movie because my favorite genre actually within Marvel is the government right stuff, the things on the ground, not out in space. I mean, I enjoy most all of it, but I think I like the realism of Captain America. Also, Wakanda. I have to say that my two favorite Marvel films were Black Panther and Winter Soldier. So I'm really looking forward to like Red Hulk and seeing Harrison Ford Hulk out, Anthony Mackie as Cap with the wings. But like, what's going on in the background, right? Like, what's the government role like? And you just get the sense that certain things that are happening now are also kind of being coded into the Marvel world, right? Like,
Mm,
oh, the government is trying to like manipulate society
mhm.
um, through super powered billionaires. I mean people, and and then there's the uh, not the well, there is the vibranium, but there's also adamantium in the big stone, what I forget what Tiamat like has been turned to stone, right, in the Eternals, and like that
Mhm.
actually shows up. They're finally working it into the movie, and so it's all
Right.
about like getting resources and like
Mhm.
tricking the public, and oh yes, I want to
Yeah.
see it.
But what I like about that are the different factions of the government that may or may not be aware of each other and what they're doing. That always fascinates me. Like, just the ability for humans to keep a secret. Like, I don't trust in it. I don't believe in it. So
Right.
anytime it's done at a large scale, it's like, whoa,
Yep.
you know? So the adamantium that also hints towards, of course, the X-Men. And yeah, this is gonna
Yeah.
be an exciting time. I'm really interested to see this, how they're gonna do it, knowing that it's all gonna come together and they're all gonna converge on each other.
Right.
It's amazing. But those are my two favorite. Black Panther one. I didn't really like the second one as much, but it was serviceable. And Winter Soldier, I think, is my favorite of all. Like, that sort of spy stuff is like James Bond on steroids.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh man, so that's what I'm looking for. So this is part two. Okay.
Part two.
I'm gonna have to look up. Let me see if I can. Let's see. Marvel joke. I'm gonna try to just Google a joke. I had one in mind, but now you're talking about Marvel. Right. Let's see
Yep.
here. Mm, oh goodness, of course, all this stuff. And we're gonna leave all this in too. Let people peek behind the curtain here. All right. Here's my attempt. You ready?
I'm ready.
Samsung needed security to stand outside their store, so they called who?
Like a Marvel character?
Uh-huh.
Huh. They called, I don't know, RoboCop. That's what I'm afraid of. That
Samsung called the Guardians of the Galaxy. There it is. All right, let's go. Right. Welcome back to Urban Academia. I'm your host, J-ZILLA, as per usual. And I have with me for part two the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Mako Nagasawa. Remind the people who you are, what you do, and why. They're at Agnosticis Center, as well as your book.
abortion policy and Christian social ethics in the United States. So I'm the director of the Agnosticis Center. We are a team of people that are proclaiming the restorative justice of God and the healing atonement of Jesus. And we do teaching, training, and writing about those subjects so that people can, and church communities especially, can embody those principles. So huge range of application, and it is firmly grounded in patristic or early Christian thought. So if you know the names Irenaeus and Athanasius, that's where I love to camp out. And we have bread and butter stuff like Bible studies and evangelism tools, and Christian ethics kind of like material for small group discussion or video or just your own personal learning, or if you're going through a deconstruction, reconstruction, you don't want to lose Jesus, but you're questioning a bunch of stuff that you're seeing white evangelicals doing right now in the US, check out our website, anastasiscenter.org.
There it is. Oh, see that? Usually, if my wife was here, she would have hit that on cue. He would have said, "Oh, check out this site," and then the site would have just magically popped up. We are working on that.
We
Let's
could
see
insert
here.
that later.
Boom! There it is. There's
Yes,
the
that is our
YouTube
YouTube
channel, and then there is the website. So, okay, I forget where we left off. I know we were heading into the third section of the book. You breaking it up into threes. Is that a sort of Easter egg? Was that on purpose? How did you come to he's laughing like, no, I was just writing and it just came out.
I wish it was as clearly thought out as that. I mean, it just was something that we're covering the same kind of periods in history, but needing to look at that history with a different lens each time, right? So the first portion of the book was about scripture and science, and how has the church related to science. The early church thought it was a friend. After the 1800s, or from that point, the church largely thought it was not a friend. And so, it's like and then abortion policy starts to get used against science. So like, well, we don't want to give in to, we don't want to be embarrassed that we relied on other science earlier, like Aristotle. Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's a really understandable thing, but it's like, we're going to camp out on like, well, personhood begins at conception and ensoulment begins at conception, because science can't touch that. So we're going to always be relevant. We're always going to have a one-up on science. And so the rest of embryology, like that, just Christians become really uncomfortable with that. But that's also part of science, so why can't we talk about it? So that's part one. Part two is men and women. What is the relationship there? What does scripture say about it? Because what's really interesting is scripture and early church history gives women certain rights or benefits of the doubt when it comes to conflicts that they have with men. So in those cases, when their gender matters, women get a kind of a benefit of the doubt, or their voice counts more. And I think that's really important. Also, I looked at other things like economics and healthcare, and what have Christians actually believed about that in history, because that kind of factors into why do women, or why do couples procure abortions today, right? And a lot of it is not just a lot of it is economics. A lot of it is a woman finds or changes her opinion about the man that she got pregnant with, or things like that. So, and then the third is law and the Constitution in the United States, because the history of U.S. law about abortion policy is really fascinating. It is really disturbing. You're like, we're not told a bunch of things about the role that abortion policy played for Catholics, for Protestants, as they tried to accomplish other goals, right? Like other goals. And that's what we really need to be attentive to. So it's the politics of how abortion policy gets used, and then what do we think about the law and the Constitution?
I love it. So in the Bible and tell me if you found this to be true as well. Because I'm more of a question asker. I'm more of a student. I wouldn't classify myself as a theologian or anything like that. The Sermon on the Mount is broken up into three pieces, and those three are broken up into three further pieces. And in the center of the center is the Lord's Prayer. Right? Have you
Yes.
found that to be so? That's why I thought, like, oh man, is he like got some sort of mythical the number of three? Got the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? But you do have three main topics here, and I think that will make it easier for us to sort of I guess talk about in an organized way because I could go everywhere.
Yeah.
So the first one up, Roe v. Wade. All right, you have a section titled Roe v. Wade and the U.S. Constitution in Context, which is a huge word for me. So talk to me a little bit about that section in particular.
Sure. Well, Roe v. Wade was obviously controversial. And when it was decided in 1973 and when it was overturned by the Dobbs decision in 2022, I mean, it's continued to be debated, processed, and poked at. The interesting thing to me is how we got there, right? So how did abortion policy play out throughout American history? And was it possible, right? Like in theory, especially from the conservative side, there are principles and there's like originalism, like what was the original meaning or what was the original understanding of the Constitution or what was the understanding of abortion at the time of the writing of the Constitution? Those become important questions. So I want to back up and kind of give a narration of that. At the time of the Constitution was written, about 1787, Puritans believed that, and not everyone was a Puritan, obviously, but this was an example of their understanding of
Right.
that early abortion was okay because God ensouled the fetus at around halfway through the pregnancy, and that moment was called quickening. It was when basically mom felt the baby kick, and motion was associated with life and from the time of Aquinas, and so they said, okay, I mean that makes sense, and we can't observe much, so we're just going to go with that. So that was actually the reigning idea, and that lasted for quite some time. Now in England, the understanding of the fetus started to change, but in the U.S., the America resisted, right? Like moving personhood to an earlier date, and that is really, really interesting in the 1800s.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you. Let me stop you there. What was it about America in general? Is it the mix of the different religions, or what sort of halted America as far as sort of keeping up with the rest of the world?
That's a great question. I would say the Bible. So, which is that's the strange thing, right? Because the it wasn't really the Bible that was moving English people to have an early date. It was just kind of science or some questions that they had about like what was happening in the earliest stages of gestation. And it wasn't unanimous there either. But in the US, because we're so Protestant here, people would read Exodus 21 and say, well, in both the, Hebrew Masoretic and also the Greek Septuagint, and say, well, neither manuscript says that personhood, the fetus should be assigned full personhood at conception. The Hebrew Masoretic seems to say it's at birth and breath. And then the Greek Septuagint says it's body and build, like at some point in, like in the middle of the pregnancy when the fetus like looks human, reasonably looks human. And it uses the miscarriage visual test for that to confirm. But otherwise, that's kind of it. And so that's why Protestants thought this is a non-issue for us. Now, there were other things, and by the way, during the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War, that's when church going was at its highest in the U.S. history. That's when biblical literacy was at its highest. Not that it's ever been like great, but because slavery was being debated, right? And so the common person was like, yeah, well, I mean, what does the Bible say? So, people were interested, and this is the same time at which most Protestants said, eh, to abortion. And the reason that started changing was two factors in the North, and then the South resisted it. So let me tell that story. So in the North, the AMA was formed in 1840, the American Medical Association. And so the professional doctors who wanted to control licensing, I mean, for good reasons and not so good reasons, right? But their good reasons was there was a lot of quacks out there running around with snake oil, like medicine, and especially when it came to contraception and abortion, they were selling poison. Like, women were getting sick, some were dying, and so the doctors used that as an issue, abortion, to pass laws, like in Connecticut in the 1820s, but it was an anti-poisoning law. It wasn't anti-abortion, because the doctors just performed abortions in their own offices and clinics and things like that. They just thought we're the safer administrators of that, if that makes sense. So the AMA was a factor in why anti-poisoning laws, which were kind of anti-abortion in that sense, were starting to get passed, starting in the 1870s. But the doctors wanted to, many of them were elite WASPs, right? Like, WASP is the old acronym, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and they were like the wealthy, and they looked at all these immigrants coming from Ireland, Italy, and Poland, and Germany, and those guys were like, they're all Catholic and we don't like them. And so they had this kind of version of manifest destiny of, hey, like, this country shouldn't help them like populate North America. This country is for us. So the Know Nothing Party, right? That was the anti-immigrant party. That was really big in Boston and other places, in northern cities, maybe New York. But essentially it was nativist in that sense, not for Native Americans. It was for Anglo-Saxon people. And they were really troubled that Catholics were having a lot of kids and Protestants weren't. And Protestant women felt very comfortable going to the doctor and getting an abortion. And so the stats are amazing. They're in my book. They're not, I can't say them off the top of my head, but like around 1895, 1900, there were so many abortions being practiced. It's staggering. So that's kind of the Protestants, but so there's this kind of tug of war about, like, should we, shouldn't we? And then what kind of laws should we have? And essentially it was, get this, like elite white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men who were like, we need our women to have more babies. That's being said right now, right? Like, because we're being outnumbered, like we're being replaced. It was an early version of racial replacement theory. So that's why in the North, they started passing stricter abortion laws, and they started challenging even quickening. But in the South, they held on to quickening for way, way longer. And the reason for that, like into the early 1900s, the reason for that was anti-Blackness. So after the Civil War, a biracial child, black and white, if a white man still wanted to rape a black woman, like, he wanted to be able to do that and just have abortion be an easily accessible thing, right, for them, early abortion especially. If a white woman got together with a man of color, then her family would typically want her to get an abortion because they don't want a biracial child. So
Right.
it served anti-blackness in the South to hold on to the quickening idea for decades longer. That is part of the history of abortion and abortion policy. So you could see, like, if you just study the laws, kind of what's going on and why abortion law and policy is it's a tool to accomplish other things.
I am look, I'm scribbling away over here in my little notebook, and I'm having trouble with it just actually sinking in. Okay, because going through the book, I'm not gonna lie, I skipped the numbers, which I usually never do because those do fascinate me. As far as the statistics that kind of show us a timeline and a direct path from how we got from here to here. Um, so utilizing laws to give you or your community a leg up is something that's still very much prominent in today's legislative branch, right? Um, Trying to understand how to make people understand that, because it's a lot easier to go pro-life or pro-choice, right? Because I don't have to think about all that. I can do
Exactly.
like J-ZILLA did, which was skip the numbers and like, all right, give me the meat, right? you know,
Right.
but how do you incentivize that sort of, people who don't really want to, they don't feel comfortable talking about this, and they have been so inundated with the, very quick and easy catchphrase, and it's either or, 1-to-1 sort of ratio. How do we speak to people about being more interested in that, and then maybe shifting a little bit? I know we'll get into that
Yeah.
in the third section of this, but what will be your, I guess, your simple answer?
Well, I mean, I sincerely believe this, and I think it's counterproductive for white evangelicals to join with the Republican Party and to bring the pro-life, anti-abortion cause into the Republican Party, because it actually does the opposite. It has the opposite effect. It causes the abortion rate to rise. So if you want to bring down the abortion rate, then it's actually uh, I'm not I'm not sure it's as simple as saying vote Democrat, but we definitely have to um, question why it is that Republicans, do things like cut off healthcare and especially contraceptive care to women,
Mhm.
um, or actually drive more people into poverty and economic hardship, right? By cutting away at social supports or undermining labor or doing things like that. Because contraceptive care and socioeconomic support, those are the most reliable ways to drive down the abortion rate. So if you care about doing that, then I just don't think there's a good argument to be made that you should not vote for the Republican Party, even though that's the stereotype, right? Of like, well, that's what we should do.
Right, right.
So just asking those questions of like, is the Republican Party counterproductive then? Right. I mean, I think the abortion numbers on the graph were just released, and the abortion rate is climbing
Mhm.
back up. It always goes up during times of economic hardship. So
Yeah.
why would we want to do that to people?
Man, a lot of it is perception. So even when you talk about the South holding on to the quickening in order to more easily allow, biracial babies to be aborted, man, it's somehow they're able to plug into people's perceptions, and that's the sort of thing that I'm looking at now. I'm trying to think of a more modern example where people are just, perception is reality. I mean, it's technically more modern, but when you had the end of slavery for most places, because, of course, there's Texas and why Juneteenth is a thing, because 2.5 years it took for, the slave owners to say, oh, actually, you've been slave for free for slavery has been abolished for 2.5 years. Right. When I think it was Grant who sent those 5,000 plus soldiers, all black regiments, by the way, to
Right.
go in and make it known everywhere by
Yep.
force. Um, After that, you get Reconstruction, and you still have a lot of soldiers from the North stationed down there, making sure that things ran like they're supposed to be ran. And then you saw, black citizens be, free black citizens in Congress, you know,
That's
and
right.
just a couple of propaganda videos and a very secret, quiet backdoor deal and to settle a very closely attended election, right? Um, where hey, we'll go ahead and call it for you if you withdraw all the troops from the South, and they did, and that was detrimental. But the perception of when slaves were free, and as Dr. Martin Luther King said, relief from or handed both freedom and poverty at the same time. What black people did was they took the cheapest materials and it ended up making them a lot of money, gave them a lot of economic power, gave them a lot of, just a lot of opportunity. And that was watermelon seeds and chicken, right?
Wow.
So one of the things is to change that perception. So they had this propaganda video where it shows black congressmen barefoot fighting and sloppily eating watermelon and chicken, and it had a sort of a two-edged approach, right? To on one side, it made black people want to avoid those things because they didn't want to perpetuate a horrific stereotype about
Right.
watermelon and chicken. Right. And then it made white people believe that, oh, look at how ignorant and stupid and they are. We have to take control, you know,
Right.
to help them out because they're dumb and stupid. Without us, they would just, wander into the ocean and all die. So
Right. And it's the
perception is
perception.
reality. Mhm.
Right. Right. And it's the
Yeah.
perception of like corruption or something, as if like, when you institute public education, like schools, publicly funded schools, in order to benefit all kids, but especially the newly freed black families and their kids, then all of a sudden we're concerned about corruption. It's like y'all weren't concerned about corruption before, right? Like when the white elite plantation owners ran things. So, it was all good. So yeah, the even the issues that we pick become politically motivated, and it's very detrimental. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to abortion policy again, that's why it can get tied into so many other things, like
Mhm.
the Christian nationalism or fears of racial replacement. It's like, oh,
Right.
we need to be strict with like our women. We're hearing today about women dying because they don't receive adequate care when they have a
Mhm.
miscarriage or birth complications, right? And 25% of all pregnancies end in a miscarriage, right? So
Mhm.
women are taking their lives into their hands uh, in certain states when healthcare is being denied to them,
Mhm.
and because doctors are afraid of administering what could be considered or what would be an abortion, but it would be uh, either life-saving or just a way to handle the risk. And yeah, so whether it's um, well, but just think of all the babies I guess we're saving. I mean, is that the trade-off?
Oh
Or
man.
we need a higher birth rate because a lot of brown people are coming to the country and we don't want to be outnumbered. Like, is that the thing
Mhm.
that people are thinking but not saying, although some people are saying it? So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it gets tied to a bunch of other possible causes, and so that's where the perception starts to influence the reality. But the
Oh.
reality is um, the making abortion policy part of the pro-capitalist criminal
Mhm.
justice realm, as opposed to the social welfare and economic justice
Mhm.
realm, actually is counterproductive, right? And so here's another touch point. In the
Mhm.
1930s, the Catholics, they saw the abortion rate totally go up, and they were alarmed because it was the Great Depression. And of course, people are going to abort fetuses when they don't have hope for themselves. Why would you want to bring a child into the world under
Mhm.
those conditions, right? And so they saw the abortion rate go up. They said, we like FDR's New Deal.
Mhm.
FDR appealed to a lot of Catholics, and he used biblical language, and what was that about? It was about
Mhm.
economic uplift, at least for some, right? Like obviously the FHA and the GI Bill were not open to Black vets and
Right.
Black households who wanted to get into a house, but that was like a huge thing for the white middle class.
Mhm.
There were labor union legislation there that was pro-labor. There was a vision of economic democracy and a democracy of small businesses. There were constraints on banking and finance and the people who manage capital, right? The taxation was higher. So the marginal tax rate for the wealthy.
Mhm.
Um, and then there was a bigger investment in just public things.
Yeah.
And it did well. So but that was the Catholic Democrat approach. It was pro
Mhm.
federal government. Now, um, in the 80s, Jerry Falwell and
Oh yeah.
Paul Weyrich and who's the other guy? Richard Viguerie, sorry, wanted to peel off Southern Democrats from uh, from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. So it was
Mhm.
part of the you know um, Southern strategy, and so they were like, "Hey, we're going to pick abortion as the major issue, then to try to bring Christians into the Republican Party." And Reagan, his coalition was basically three, types of people, three types of conservatives, like libertarians who wanted to dismantle the New Deal and take away social supports, right? Because
Mhm.
they said that's communist. Is totally They're totally lying. But again,
Yeah.
like your point, like perceptions
Perception.
can
Mhm.
can influence reality. Um, Number two, the anti-Soviet Union hawks who just wanted to like fight communism,
Right.
maybe literally, and so they were anti-communist. And then there were, the white evangelicals who they liked Reagan because they said he talked an anti-abortion game,
Yeah.
and Richard Viguerie, when he was at Republican fundraisers, he openly admitted, he's like, we just call it communist. Like, what drives the abortion rate? It's
Mhm.
communism. It's like, wait, how do you get from there to there? He's like, what you tell people is, why do people get abortions? It's because
Yeah.
they don't trust God, and so they're atheist or they're humanist. And who's
Mhm.
organizing the humanists and the atheists? The communists. So you
Mhm.
see there, like
Just tie them all
abortion,
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just tied all in. Like what drives abortion is communism. It's like, look,
But that
like
sounds like another politician who's done pretty well for himself, who he himself said, when asked about his, flip flopping one way or the other, and he just simply said, "Well, you just say stuff. I say stuff and they cheer, so I keep saying it, right? And
exactly.
but they don't cheer as much. I don't say it so much, So I just kind of go off of the crowd, and it's like, what? You're
That
being
is,
see based off of what they cheer for, what they don't, you know?
yep, yep,
Yeah, to their face saying that, it is just like, okay. Okay,
yep,
but the
yep,
perception is these are the bad guys who look down on you. I'm the good guy who's gonna free you of that. Hop on board. No matter how
right,
many things I take from your family's plate, whether it
right.
be food, opportunity, or any of the like. But yeah, talk to me
And the
about Roe v.
lies.
Wade.
Yes.
If I
Well,
wanted to give you, because we got the why,
yep.
right, or how they kind of led to that. give me a short 1 minute, if it's possible, on explaining what Roe v. Wade was, what did it actually do, and then what was the perception of what it did?
Yes. And so Roe v. Wade developed the trimester system. It was the first case to do that. Now, whether they should have done that's a good question. But essentially, they said there's lots of competing interests. Basically, there's the woman's interest, there's the local state's interest, and then there's the interest of the fetus. There's the interest of society, and so how do we balance all these interests? So they did do some history, and you read the Supreme Court ruling itself. It is interesting. They try to go back in history, and they do point out that Christians had this, kind of middle position of like early abortion was okay because quickening happened halfway through the pregnancy. So they're like, okay, so that's not the only factor, but they thought of it as balancing competing interests. So it was under the idea of privacy. The woman has privacy rights, or a right to her own body. So that was the first trimester. It was to be legal. The second trimester, I believe, there were a balance of interest. Basically, the states would be able to decide where in the second trimester to draw lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the third trimester, the fetus and society, kind of their interests took precedent. And it was generally thought that when the fetus became viable was in there. And so they wanted to protect the fetal life. So there was some, things that happened later. There was another case called Doe v. Bolton, and then there was the Casey Planned Parenthood case that qualified that and kind of relaxed or took away the trimester system and just made it viability. But Roe v. Wade itself held to a balance of interests, which personally, I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, that's a pretty thoughtful way to do it. What was it, more legislative than judicial?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Right. So it could be critiqued on that ground. Like, was the Supreme Court legislating from the bench? Yeah, I would say so. But what Congress, what they could have done was ratify it, and then they would just say, yeah, that's not legislation, which perhaps Obama should have done that within the first few days of his first term.
His first term. And that is super important for people to hear. And this ideal of perception, right? I don't want to be perceived as a person who is, soft on crime and immigration. Is how he earned the nickname Deporter in Chief, right?
That's right.
As well as the perception of, I can't be a black dude in here pardoning a bunch of black dudes from prison. That will look bad, right? Because he's thinking further on down the line of like, I want more opportunities for black and brown and women and people, white males as well as other than white males to be the president of the United States. And so he was super, centric, right? But he leaned conservative on a lot of things with the hopes to bring people over. And what that cost him was, by the time the first midterms in his presidency rolled around, people, it hurt him in the legislative branch. And then after that, it was, we're gonna try to stop everything you do, right? And the biggest thing he did was kind of, I'm not gonna say use, but for lack of a better term, taking advantage of, I guess you could say, of Teddy Kennedy's, lifelong push for universal health care and his passing away as a catapult of, don't let this man die in vain. It's like, well, okay, that's where, perception goes right. Well, we don't want to look like, the big bad Republican, so we better vote it through. And that's how he got that done. But Yeah, the perceptions. That's seems to be a reoccurring theme in that.
Yeah, that's right. That's very true.
Hmm.
So, and you know that, and that's why I'm trying to focus my comments on policy and not the politics, because politics involves the perceptions, and I'm neither an expert in that nor uh, do do I know, like, how to advise anyone. But but from a policy perspective, it seems like, well, there was a framework in place, and but one thing about that is Roe v. Wade became actually, like, look at the Southern Baptist response to Roe v. Wade. They didn't comment on it for like years because they were okay. It and this gets at to, like, Roe v. Wade was selected, like, the perception of it was like, oh, now this is judicial overreach,
Hmm.
because but really, like, Christians, they well, I mean, Catholics were kind of perturbed, but Protestant evangelicals weren't until about 1978, 79.
Mm.
And that's when, like, again, Reagan's coalition was starting to be formed. The moral majority was formed by
Hmm.
the Gary Wyrick and Falwell,
Hmm.
and they took advantage of new camera technology that enabled us to see the fetus in the womb, and it's like,
Right.
look, it. I mean, and who's not moved, right? But then, so everything. That's how I think Roe v. Wade got perceived as, oh, that's the evil thing that happened.
Yeah.
And oh, it's also the federal government taking away rights from states, from people,
Hmm.
from babies. And that fit right into um already the Southern resistance to Brown v. Board of Education from
Hmm.
1954. It's the same language, these unelected judges making decisions for us, taking away rights from families, from states, and
Right.
they just transferred it over to Roe v. Wade, because I think in 1978, Jimmy Carter um, threatened segregation academies, basically, like Bob Jones University, and other, like, uh, you know, uh,
Exclusive or
schools. Yeah,
yeah, not
schools,
necessarily private, but a lot of private schools.
a lot of private schools,
Hmm.
and where they were basically only admitting white people, and they, white kids. And Jimmy Carter said, look, if you're going to do this, and they did it under, get this, freedom of religion, right? That
Hmm.
was that was
Yeah.
their rationale.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter said, we're going to take away your tax exempt status. Like, you should not get what, nonprofit status from the IRS perspective, so we're going to
Mm.
stick the IRS back on you. You're going to get taxed on that,
Right.
because that's not a public good. And so so they were so mad that but they didn't know what to do, because it was becoming more and more unpopular to be a segregationist. Hmm.
Hmm.
And so Vigary, Wyrick, and Falwell said, we need a new issue. Let's
Yes.
pick abortion.
But that is the most important point right there. It's a campaign ad. They
Yeah,
literally said, "Hey, let's pick abortion, and we can get this overturned in." I think they guessed for like 60 years or so, and they got it done in almost half the time. Thanks to President Trump and his influence. But that perception, we can go back to an old trick, right? We can dust off the I think it was Birth of a Nation, the movie that was wildly, propagandist against
right.
Reconstruction era, black politicians. So the same thing happened with marijuana, right? There's a guy who was about to lose an election. He was like, I gotta find something. He's like, oh, I know. Marijuana, it makes black men violently crazy towards white men and sexually abusive towards white women. Done. Done. Right. And what
Right.
is our deal with? Is it a baseball tie-in? The three strikes you're out, the three trimester thing. Like, is it
Oh
a
gosh.
like what is people's obsession with, like, let's just make it threes? We love to make things threes.
Right. Right. Because Clinton was actually pulling the Democratic Party more right,
Mm,
and I think it was him that passed the three strikes
I believe
laws.
so. I believe that happened under. I'm gonna have to look that up,
Yeah,
but I'm
it's
pretty
true.
sure. I mean, the what was it, the crime bill as well?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, what is it with this country's? But it's a good sale. I mean, at that time, still, I mean, basketball was becoming a little bit more popular. Football was creeping up there as well, but baseball was still America's pastime. It was still the biggest thing. So that's an easy sell. But to sort of wrap things up into abortion is evil and communist, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we'll sell to them because they don't really like segregation. So
Right.
perception. What is your hope for that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Hold on, let me ask it this way. Chapter 13, which is the second section in the final section in your trimester of the book, if you will. See what I did there? Abortion and the U.S. Constitution as it could be. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what I mean, based on all your data and all your extensive knowledge on this particular issue, what could abortion in this country be according to the Constitution?
I think the procedural side is important, right? Like, I think it forces us to take a hard look at the history of the Constitution and all of the factors that went into it, right? And so, especially slavery, especially plantation capitalism dynamics, especially the desire to like control uh, uh, kind of the wealthy controlling the poor. And so, if we're honest about all those things, I think, which I think it's important to, then we can understand like, oh, the Constitution doesn't really settle much of the issue of abortion. I mean, unless we want to go back to the quickening time and that understanding. So laws do evolve, but then, I don't think, and I say it that way because laws should evolve. We don't have like a static set in stone constitution, but
Right.
neither should we be lying about what words mean. Like when we mean, like with these words in the Constitution itself. So like we the people, like that's how the Constitution begins. Well, if it's we the people who's delegating some of our natural rights I mean, that's how people thought about it.
Right.
To the governments, like the state government, well, especially the federal government at the time, then, there's all the rights that we don't delegate to the federal government, we retain for ourselves. So, like, that's, I think the Ninth Amendment or something. So that's there, right? So abortion doesn't need to be in the Constitution. Um, and who do we mean by people? It's people who are giving this consent. So I think that means like folks who are outside the womb at the very least. So
Right.
the whole idea of the personhood amendment or the personhood initiative, which is saying like, well, persons means like the fetus from conception. I mean, how could it possibly have meant that? Right. And the 14th Amendment refers to birth. So we're talking about birthright citizenship today because Trump wants to overturn, but that refers to birth and persons born. So our citizens. So, let's not play games with the words, which is what a lot of people are trying to do
Yeah.
just to make things fit, as if the Constitution secretly meant this the whole time. Like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Uh, so that I would say that's one thing. And then I think is the legal honesty. Um,
Mhm.
I think another is, well, I mean, maybe we should have more like popular ballot type of initiatives for like, the law saying we're going to try to do it that way.
Right.
Like, what would be an appropriate um, system for thinking about the 9 months of pregnancy, all things going, like if it goes well, that
Mhm.
9 month period, like how do we understand that? Again, Western Europe actually uses a system where it's like abortion is legal in the first trimester, and then there start to be certain kinds of um, restrictions or requirements, like getting some kind of counseling,
Mhm.
or going before a board or something like that. So it's not an absolute, to my understanding, it's not an absolute, but it ban, but it's a discouragement. And I could be for that,
Mhm.
because Western Europe has the lowest abortion rates in the world, and they
Wow.
also, think about economics, right? Like, how do
Mhm.
we care about people? How do we, allow mothers, especially, to um, stay home if they want to, or keep their job if they want to.
Mhm.
But in any case, like, there's a lot, and then a pro-family policy where a lot of European countries have assistance for childcare, and
Mhm.
then good quality education, and things like that, good nutrition.
Mhm.
So, and healthcare. Like, those are things that Americans feel very nervous about. And so
Right.
we think about, like, those things in the US, their worries, and it does influence people to get abortions or to not have kids, right? Like,
Absolutely.
somewhere around 16%, and of abortions are procured, of all abortions that we know of, are procured by married couples, right? And that's probably underreported. But what does
Oh
that
yeah.
tell us, right? Like, that tells us, see, there,
It's not
that
some sinful, gross thing in the shadows. It's a couple making a very difficult decision that we can't afford to feed another mouth. We
that's
just
right.
can't. It's
That is
arithmetic.
right. That is
Yeah.
right. And, women in poverty have 3 times the abortion rate as women not in poverty. What does that tell us? Right? It tells us
Yeah.
a lot of things, but, like, first of all, it that it th there's more pressure, um, to be a woman. It's more expensive to be a
Mhm.
woman than a man at any income level, because she has to spend more of her income on health, hygiene. I mean,
Mhm.
it's unfair to women that they have to spend more on their professional attire than men. It's like, I I could have a few suits and just, like, change my tie, but, like,
Yeah.
if a woman doesn't change her outfit every month, right, like, every day, and, like, if she
Right.
repeats an outfit, within, like, a week or 2 weeks, it's like
Perception.
people start noticing. It's like, "Oh, what's going on with this?"
Yeah.
And it's like, it's totally unfair. So, and there's so
Oh
many
man.
pressures for women to live with a boyfriend, for instance, because
Mhm.
maybe they feel unsafe at home because there's not enough housing, right? And so they get with a boyfriend, and then they
Right.
become pregnant, or things like that. It's just,
Mhm.
it, you would think, like, okay, if we want to bring down the abortion rate, then we should help women, especially, but everyone in general, get out of
Yeah.
poverty.
But it's the
We
again, okay, this perception. There are, people say like, "Oh, you can't keep crying wolf about the boogeyman." It's like boogeymen do exist, and it doesn't take a lot of them to convince the rest of us to behave in a certain way. Like in the idea that, hey, we can have, what causes a lot of global diseases and issues and famine and drought. It's
right,
like, well, we don't have. I mean, we have the technology for irrigation. We have what seems to be mechanisms of even extracting the salt out of ocean water and utilizing it for things. So why doesn't every single person on the planet have enough water? And it's just like it's just an amount of money, right? Why isn't the world government just saying, no, 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 this is one thing we're gonna make sure? Well, because there are actively people who are just like, no, I don't want to give them an opportunity to claw out of whatever mess they're in, because then they'll come from my position. Like that's it. It's a lot of it feels like a lot of guilty conscience because back in the day, if black people had any kind of power, like I know what I would do if I had been enslaved for 400 plus years and made to work under crazy conditions for free while being abused physically, spiritually, mentally, sexually, all the leaves, right? I know what I would do. So it's like we can't. I mean, that's indicative of the comment that Jefferson makes when he says slavery is like a wolf we have by the ear. We can't afford to hang on to it, but neither can we afford to let it go. Because, yeah, of course, the wolf is going to turn around and bite us. But as we start to see progression, and that becomes more and more, it becomes more and more apparent that, like, oh, these people just want to be seen as people and work and live and make mistakes and shoot ball and drink beers and watch the football game like anybody else. They're not looking for this grand conspiracy of revenge, you know? Just like
That's right.
the gun laws, the only time they changed in this country is when Nation of Islam and Black Panther members were saying, as a requirement of to be a part of this group, you must be trained and you must own a firearm. Go out there, get your license, and get a firearm. And firearm sales and ammunition went up, and they were like, "Oh no, we got to do something about this because this could be really bad. This is finally it. They're coming at us for slavery. Here's their revenge tour." And it's like, no, we just want to protect ourselves like everybody else.
Exactly.
So,
And Ronald
yeah,
Reagan, when he was governor of California, said like,
yeah.
no one needs concealed carry. No one needs open like or which one was it? I forget. Like either open
Oh, man,
carry or concealed
I
carry.
think it was concealed carry.
Yeah. He was like,
Yeah,
reasonable people don't need that. It's like,
yeah. Like, what are you
wow,
trying to
how
hide?
times have
What are you trying to
changed.
hide?
Yeah,
Right? Right.
right.
But again, it's just here's where Republicans are great at that Democrats are not. One, if once we finish fighting and decide who our guy is, we all get in line no matter what. You can call my wife ugly. You can say my dad was, involved in the Kennedy assassination, right? You could call me Hitler. Once we decide who's who, we all get in line. I mean, the guy that could you imagine a world where someone called a president Hitler and then would later become his vice president? Like that's incredible to me. But on the other side, Democrats are still playing this what seems to me an antiquated game of we have to look like we're perfect angels who follow the law in every regulation in every practice and tradition. And it's like, why are you kicking out a great politician because of the optics? Right? It
Right.
seems like, it appears like. So we have to be really hard on our own Democrats and be hard on the Republicans. And it's like that's a losing strategy. And
Right. As if Democrats are the ones who have to um play the bipartisanship game or give
mhm,
the appearance of like we just want to work with
right.
Republicans. FDR said, no, um, this is what elections are for. This
Yeah.
is what it decides. And what was his great phrase? Like, he was referring to the billionaires or the millionaires and the bankers and the
Mm.
wealthy at the time. He's like, I welcome their hatred.
I have never heard that. That is
Oh
amazing.
yeah, yeah. He was like, organized money, government by organized money is as just as dangerous as government by organized mob.
Yes. Ooh, I love it.
So why don't Democrats show some anger?
Because it's unprofessional, it's unprecedented-like. It's why Democrats can spend a year and a half calling someone a fascist and a threat to democracy, and then go have tea and chum it up and make jokes at these events. And it's like, well, the next time in 2 years when you come out with that same old tired plan that, oh, they're a danger. They're like, I saw you have tea with them. Obama, I saw your wife stay at home, first of all. Then I saw you making jokes about a man who is, for a group of people who called your wife a man. Like Big Mike was trending at one point, right? And it's just like, what? Because they're playing a different game. Republicans no longer care, which that's the thing that scares me, because the people who are really we need to start watching are the JD Vances or even the Vivek Ramaswamys of the world.
Yeah.
The people who sound great, who have great ideas and everything. But like if you listen closely, it's like, yeah, that'd be great. Like I think Vivek is he's getting ready for a governorship run there in his home state of Ohio. And like he's saying things like, yeah, I believe we can put $10,000 per child into, the I don't know if it's the S&P, but the stock market, let it grow interest. So by the time they finish, now they're participating in capitalism. They're participating in the stock market. And it's like, how many of those poor families are going to be willing to penalize themselves and yank it out before it even has a chance to vest, right? But he's selling this idea instead of talking about increasing wages, production up, profits up, wages flatline.
Right.
Like fix that. Or at least make these corporations pay taxes. Because the argument for that is, well, the rich already pay about 90% of the taxes. How much more you want them to pay? I'm not talking about the rich. I'm talking about the quote unquote corporations that the rich happen to own.
Right.
That wasn't always like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you should have me back on to talk about tax policy. But you're exactly right. I think, there are things, there are ideas and policies that would really help people. Again, I mean, we were talking about abortion. We care about this issue. We want to have the abortion rate go down. But how can we do that? Well, there's the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act that has stalled out in Congress and kind of died. But it said something like this: let's raise taxes on corporations that don't use a wage multiple tether that tethers the CEO pay to the janitor's pay, right? Because why is it that we allow the corporation to be this instrument of so much wealth inequality and income inequality? Why don't we make it more of a tool of equality? And there's all these lame excuses of, well, there's risk, certain people are taking more risk, like the CEO takes more risk, he or she moves somewhere and then has to move their family. It's like, look, I mean, the janitor takes risks by staying in his or her community and hoping for a job, and hoping that Wall Street isn't going to buy out his house. So why do we reward certain risks more than others, right? It's so unacceptable. And that is not a welfare solution. That is what Elizabeth Warren, Senator of Massachusetts, my state, calls pre-distribution. Why don't we change the rules of the road of this economy, right? Another thing that would really help is changing patent law. All the AI stuff and how Amazon makes profits for Jeff Bezos, that rests on all of these things that were designed with public taxpayer money. And it was researched by the military, basically, and developed by the military. The Apple iPhone, almost every component was developed by the military. And they just put it together in this package, touchscreen technology. Why do we do that? Why do we allow the best R&D to be developed on public funding, and then when it comes to profiting from all of that tech, all of that advancement, we allow it to be privatized? Why don't you and I and the public have a 49% or 50% or whatever share in the patents of all these things? Because we paid for it.
In the same, so these sort of traps that the current president lays for other people, that he continuously falls in, and then once he falls in and people shine a light, it's like, hey, we caught you down there. He's like, nah, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. I'm meant to be here. I'm here on official business for something else. It's like, no, you're in the hole of a trap that you lay. It's like, no, I'm not. Fake news. that sort of gall is that surpasses my comprehension.
Right.
But what he's talking about with TikTok and saying, "Hey, we make y'all a lot of money by virtue of using it. It'd be kind of nice if Americans could benefit from that, make us a partner." And I thought, but none of the other people you have on the dais right behind you, as you taking pictures during your campaign with truck drivers and coal miners and all these folks, and then come time for your inauguration, it's 30% of the world's riches. You know, like, are we going to be able to participate in that? They are extracting our data. They are manipulating us into purchasing things. They are utilizing our content creation and our community gathering and building for their own purposes, and we get $0 out of that, right? And if you do it
Right.
enough at a certain clip, certain millions of views, we'll gladly make you a partner and give you pennies on the dollars of what we're getting for that stuff.
Right.
Like, are we gonna not look at any of that? You know?
That's right.
So it'll be interesting to see if anybody sort of pulls on that thread a little bit and see how we get to our final point here, how we can find some hope. Because you say, I love how you put it, Christianity and liberalism, there is still hope. Talk to me about the hope and the ideas of what we could actually do so we don't feel so helpless and just in a spectator position.
Yeah, I wrote that chapter, the last chapter, because of the Christian nationalist, or what's called the Catholic integralist, the people, whether Protestant or Catholic, who believe like, my faith, I always feel under siege because of all these non-Christians, and like I no longer believe that democracy is compatible with Christianity. That is a form of despair, because and my first challenge to hope is to them. First of all, you're painting yourself into a corner of your own making, right? Like, and so the reason you're despairing is because you have these expectations, basically, of Christian triumphalism. Like, how, why, what, did Jesus, the apostles, did they think that way? I mean,
Right.
no. So because you don't recognize that in scripture, the dynamic is always between Christ versus empire. And there is just an ongoing tension. We do the best we can. God will sort out all of our motives, the effectiveness of our actions in the end. I mean, we do have to take these things seriously, which means, like, look, if you don't bring the abortion rate down to zero, you haven't failed, right? Like, or if you don't see, and then I think some people think that the Christian nationalist is really difficult. They think, well, God will judge our nation based on the way we articulate these laws. And first of all, biblically and theologically, I totally disagree with that. I don't think we should read there a reason why that dynamic was present in the Old Testament, right? God did work with nations, but that's because the people of ancient Israel, he had called them to basically produce Jesus, to nurture Jesus, and he had to protect them until they did that. And then the kind of whole dynamic of nations and maneuvering around nations and with them, it goes away. That's why we don't see that in the New Testament, and there's really important reasons for that. And we are accountable as individuals before God, with
Yes.
what we do with our own heart and how we regard Jesus. But nations, no, that's just not how it works. And so, I say that, and I know I'm putting that strongly because if that's the starting point for people, then there's actually not common ground that I can find with them, because I am totally about, I want to bring down the abortion rate, but see, they don't. They want laws in place so that they can punish people who break their laws. And that's a different way, that's a different goal. And so, it means that that people aren't thinking strategically about, like, how humans actually live and interact
Right.
with laws. And here's an analogy. Like, do I want to bring down the rate of domestic violence? Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Um, is it just as simple as passing stricter laws against domestic violence, or should we just build more housing? Right? Right? Because if we built more
Interesting.
housing, people would have more options,
Mhm.
and and they would also be able to get away from domestic abuse. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So, because unless you're going to lock someone up forever,
Right.
which I don't think we should do that,
Right.
then people don't feel safe reporting to the police like this happened at home.
Mhm.
And if they don't do that, then they're making themselves vulnerable again. So unless
Yeah.
there's a so in other words, you can take a strategic approach to law and policy in order to accomplish things without saying, well, the law has to be articulated in a certain way because that's what makes me feel good about it, or
Right.
that's what makes God feel good about it. So the Christian nationalist approach to law as it has to articulate the moral itself is self-defeating. It is,
Right.
especially on this issue.
Well,
So
it'll be nice if, these things could actually be voted on versus like you talked about before, these unelected, judges making decisions. Whether it turns out to be for the better or not, I would rather see it, actually debated on Congress floor, right?
yeah,
Um, but oh man, it's really a people problem that we have to fix first if we want to see any real
yeah,
results. Because I think
right,
people's lack of imagination. Dr. King once talked about the cruel just or the cruel gist it is, or jest, sorry, to tell a bootless man to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, it's like we do believe in work. We do believe in all these things. We do believe
right,
in the nuclear family for the most part, and people who don't, they're fine with getting some contraception and living their lives as they choose, as they see fit. But there's something causing all these other things to sort of clash into each other. But yeah, I really like the idea of Christ versus empire, right? So he wasn't trying to let me get in the government and change the laws from the inside and use the government as an arm of, religion. It's like, no, that's not how that works. Like, fine, if that's your job, do it to the standards of God, right? Otherwise, there's only one other option that you are serving. So he keeps it pretty simple in that way. But yeah, I love it. So what are you telling people to like, hey, just hang in there, focus on the oh man, what is the Eleanor Roosevelt quote? Some group of people who discuss other people, some discuss events, great people discuss ideas. Like how do we keep people in that, aiming for the highest possible good by discussing ideas? And then of course, shout out your very favorite podcast, at least for today.
well, urban academia it is. Thanks so much, Jeremy. um, I hope we do, as a citizenry, as the American public, discuss ideas, discuss scripture, discuss how our faith intersects with um, what we're perceiving and what we're prioritizing. We really need to do that, and I'm really grateful that you're using your podcast to help have those kinds of conversations. And I'm really glad to be here. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. And you know what? I had things out of order. See, I got into my notes and got myself crisscrossed, right? Because I saw the time and I was like, oh wait, is it time for him to go? I can't remember because I could talk to you forever. Um, Let me go back a little bit. When you are talking about, okay, we understand that people like their catchphrases and things that fit on hats and t-shirts. Um, can you talk to me about the process of how we should think about anything that people try to, I guess push on us as far as ideology? Like for me, if I tell my kid, we taught them the power of why, but to do so in a respectful way, right? Hey, stop doing that. Well, may I ask why? Sure. It's dangerous for you to put your sister's dirty clothes hamper over your head and throw yourself down the stairs. Like, it's dangerous. You like having fun and doing stuff, right? To keep doing that, you got to let's make a new rule now because I see the type of person you are and it don't look good so far, right? Because you're 5. I know it's hard being 5, but how do we get people to think about that with everything they hear? So if a politician tells you, you know, I don't know, pick a thing that you're gonna be winning so much that you're gonna get tired of winning. You're gonna make so much money, right? My suggestion to my audience is to say, "Cool, thank you. How?" And to follow that thread all the way till you get to a real solution or at least an idea that the guy wants to try, so we don't get tricked with these concepts of a plan, these big splashy, executive orders or boastful statements, but really there's no real meat to it that will help the American, I don't know, population. So how do we think about things? Like, how do we do a sort of fact check? I guess is the first part of the question, and then can we come up with a something that can fit on a hat or on a T-shirt so people can, really focus in on and adopt themselves?
That's a great question. I think that one of the questions that I ask nowadays is, what emotion is this person, this ad, this pitch, this video on YouTube, what is it trying to do to me? Because if it's fear and anger, maybe that's appropriate, but also that's also a way to be manipulated, right? And because if someone makes you afraid or angry, then you're more likely to be manipulated than in other situations. I mean, addiction is another case, but uh, the algorithms are really making us addicted to these, I don't know, dopamine hits or, these emotions that we're feeling. So I would add that as well. And it doesn't mean that we should stop consuming media or
Mhm.
social media, but we have to be aware of, like, what is this doing to me?
Right.
What is this trying to do to me? And then, especially if you're a serious follower of Jesus. Jesus says, be careful about anger, be careful about
Mhm.
lust, right? Like greed and covetousness, like when you're, or fear. Like, I think the thing that Jesus says most often is fear not. And fear versus faith. So, so I think the importance of our character and especially our conversation with the Lord is always important, and it always has to like factor those things in. Like, what emotion is it that I'm trying actually experiencing? And then when we read the Gospels, especially, and ask, what did Jesus feel and when? Right, like, I think that is also very important. Like, where did he feel compassion? Where was he interruptible? Um, and then how did he love people? How did he try to reach them? The I think that's really important. So, of course, all the things that I've written in the book that you and I have talked about in terms of, well, how do we know what we know? Right? Like, it's epistemology. Like, where do we get our ideas, our beliefs
Mhm.
about the truth, about facts, and, in this case, things that we don't observe, like fetal life, um, ensoulment. Why do I believe that it's at conception or at any other time? So I think we need to have those conversations, And then when we're with other people, be able to say, well, this is my story of how I came to believe such and such, but my story may not be done, and my story is not done in terms of my story as a human being. Hopefully I am always learning and growing. And I think if we present our learning to one another in the way that it happened, and how we felt about it as it happened, I think we'll be able to have better conversations.
Mm. Boy, that's good. That's good. Especially that's something I've been playing around with on the other show is how do we know what we know? You know, like I try to teach my kids that now to sort of question everything. You know, you can do so respectfully, and then when you come against a good answer or wisdom and you don't have an alternative, well, that needs to be truth, right? That needs to be law until something else presents itself. Not,
Hmm.
go
That's
off
right.
of the facts, not feelings, versus feelings, not facts. I like it. What about this? Fear not, question everything. Huh?
That's a good one. Yeah.
That one, I was between that one or fear is a lie, ask why. Right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
That can
I
stick
like it.
with me.
We'll workshop some stuff, right?
Yeah.
We'll see what we can come up with because that's another thing Republicans are good at, like MAGA, like the branding around that again, which is another sort of a perception, right? If I see somebody wearing a MAGA hat, I mean, even down to a big truck with the American flag waving, it's like, ooh, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
like, why am I feeling like that? It's an American flag. I
Right.
should want to stand up and go, yeah, oh glory, go get it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certain quotes are time tested. MAGA is from Reagan. It's from the
Hmm.
Klan. I
Hmm.
mean, Trump didn't invent that. He's just
No,
recycling stuff. That's what he
he's
does.
repurposing and rebranding,
Yep.
right? It's the same thing
Exactly.
Elon Musk did with his first company. He wrote in the contract to basically just call me a founder, right? He wasn't a founder. He didn't come up with that,
Exactly.
but because they are aware of perception
Perceptions.
and
Yeah.
sales,
Yeah.
marketing, advertising, all those things. It's the reason why some companies spend a third of their, profits on research and development and marketing.
Yeah.
Like knowing how Mako and J-ZILLA think and what they crave and what they want deep down, right? And how to quickly get it to them. I
Yep.
mean, it's Amazon's one click thing, right? If I like, yeah, people like the site, but how can I make it easier from the time that they say, I want this and I'm done with the fillings, right? So all of a sudden your name and your card is automatically filled in for you. It's a one click, and then 2 to 3 days, boom, it's there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what they're good at. And painfully, Democrats, not so much. Kamala Harris had wonderful ideas, but she had the steak, but did not know how to sell the sizzle.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, if we were looking for a hat, how about FDR? I welcome their hatred.
you know
Um,
what?
you know,
I'm writing that down.
I, it's not like I adore everything about FDR. Obviously, he was succumbed to white supremacy and the housing policy, and then he issued the order that rounded up Japanese Americans during World War II. So,
Right,
so it's not like I'm blind to that.
right.
But the way he fought the banks and
Mhm,
the wealthy of his day,
mhm.
chef's kiss to that, right? Like
Yeah.
that
Just
is, we need to learn from that, and we
yeah.
can learn from that. So I welcome their hatred.
Oh man, that is a good dismount. That is Mako Nagasawa, artist, author and also the director of a Gnosticist Center. How am I doing with that? Huh?
Perfect. Perfect.
Go right there. If you, well, not that one. Almost. Hang in there. There it is. Go right there for some YouTube conversation. And here's the website, which I'm sure you prefer the website, correct? Yeah.
Either way.
See what they're working on. Uh, I'm going to be a part of a discussion there, or, right? You have to remind me of that. I'm looking forward to that, man. my wife and I both. But thank you so much for joining us. Just hang out in the back room, get you some cookies in the green room back there, some juice and whatnots, and I'll wrap up the show here. Abortion is not an easy thing. I think I said before the first time I discussed this with a couple of ladies on the show, one who was pro-life, the other who was pro-choice. I remember stopping their argument for a moment and just saying, "Hey, if you believe it's killing the baby, that's horrible. I don't want that. If you believe it's a procedure, like fine, but also you don't want to go under the knife for procedures willy-nilly, right? How can we drive the number down?" They both agreed on that they would like to see that number go down. Then we can get into the discussion of how we got here, right? Which we talked about with Mako. How the perception of things sort of shape what we think and feel. I once asked somebody, "Hey, why do you like Coke?" As in Coca-Cola. And he was like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "This is good." I was like, "Yeah, but how did it get to you?" Like, what's this guy talking about? And I remember him making fun of me, and I was like, this is incredible. He has no idea about advertising. He has no idea about getting into the mindset of his great grandmother, and now all of a sudden his grandmother is a Coke drinker, and now he drinks it because it was in the house for him to even experience. He may have not even met his favorite beverage yet, but Coke is his drink because somebody wrote some great ad campaigns. So understanding all of that, but remembering the human element of all of this and making sure that we are doing things that we question authority, we question power respectfully, but we're doing things to help each other be our best selves. And I think if we can do that, we can lean towards the last chapter of his book and understand that there's still hope. But hey, that's for people with common sense. I'm trying to get some the rest of the audience is as well. So join us every week here at Urban Academia Podcast as we try to look for it, because we all know that common sense ain't coming. See you next week. Peace. Freedom.